interview. We'd like to welcome everybody here to the Ratfink Reunion 2023. We got our special guest here, Mr. Bob Larivee Sr., and our great friend here, good old Pirate Larry, the Texas Pirate. We're super excited to have him here, and also, one side note for Pirate Larry, he's been doing our Ratfink TV for the last while, and it's fantastic. It's on YouTube, so jump on YouTube, type in Ratfink TV, and get your cheese.
Get your cheese.
I can't do it in the pirate voice like Larry. Get your cheese.
Get your cheese.
Or the Texas accent. We'd like to thank both of these gentlemen for spending their weekend here with us. We're very honored and privileged to have them here. Two great friends and both legends. So I'll turn the time over here to Pirate Larry and to Bob Larivee Sr.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Cody. We're going to continue on with where we started yesterday, with talking to Bob about how he managed and promoted the World of Wheels show car series. And something I was thinking about is how Bob was able to make that so successful and what made it so different than anybody else that was out there trying to promote car shows. And Bob, I just was wondering, how did you had so many celebrities and things to do? How did you, I mean, you had the Playmates, I guess you had them through, you had a couple of years, you'd have every one of the months. So Miss January, you know, all the way through. And I guess you did that all through Hugh Hefner's company, through Playboy. And then you had all these other celebrities. How did you manage to get all these celebrities and all that stuff?
Well, it's sort of an interesting story. We, back in the 60s, I had my first success in 1960, as I said yesterday. And we were expanding very rapidly. What I found out was that most of the major cities in America didn't have a hot rod show. So I got a book with populations, and I'd never really done any traveling to speak of, and found out all these various cities: Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, cities across Canada, all the way to Mississippi, and we found out that none of these cities had hot rod shows. So I didn't have the money to fly to these cities, so I spent the summers driving to these various cities, and I'd go to find a speed shop in town, go to the speed shop, ask them if they had a show. If they didn't have a show, did they have a building? If they had a building, I'd end up going to the building. But I'd also ask the speed shop if there were any clubs in town, because the format that we had developed at Detroit was a club, a PR person, which in Detroit was Don Riddler, and whatever feature attractions we could get. This started out with well-known cars, and eventually got into Ed Roth, George Barris, people like that, and then we tried to think of something we could do to the shows to make it more exciting, to draw more people, and we came up with the Playmate idea. And we contacted Playboy in Chicago at the time, and we found out that in order to book a Playmate, you had to be an advertiser, which we were not, of course. But we could get an advertiser. If we could get an advertiser, then we would be able to book a Playmate.
Right.
So what happened was we thought about it, and we said, well, gee, we've got a lot of advertisers showing in our shows, like Ford and Chrysler. We went to Chrysler, and we asked Chrysler if we could use their name with Playboy so that we could book Playmates. And they immediately said yes. So we were in, and that began the use of celebrities, which was probably in the 60s, and then really expanded as the years went on. For the next 20 years, eventually we became the largest booker of Playmates in the country, and we got to know them so well that through the ladies that ran Playboy Promotions, Mickey Garcia in particular. If we wanted to, we could meet at the mansion. Wow, I've never been to a place like that. So it was fantastic, and I got to take my family, my kids, and anybody else that wanted to go, we could take them to the mansion, and it was really something. And if we wanted to, we could have breakfast there. It was just fantastic, and we did that for the next 20 years. Eventually, as Larry said, we always kept trying to expand the Playboy thing, eventually doing fashion shows, and eventually using 12 Playmates in a show. That, of course, became expensive, but it was extremely successful. We only did it in 2 cities, in Houston and Detroit. But in addition to that, what happened in 1970 turned our shows completely, and that was, I had a friend, I think he was a friend, his name was Chris Christensen. He was out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he had been running some small shows in the Midwest. And we called him the Great Kahuna of the Corn Belt. And he was a big guy, he smoked foot-long cigars, and he had spent a lot of time in LA and met a lot of celebrities, including people like Telly Savalas and so forth. He just loved hanging around with celebrities. And he came to me one day and he said, Bob, he said, I've been really successful with my Iowa shows. I booked a pig from Green Acres and it really helped my attendance. And of course I laughed and said, I don't really want to book a pig into my shows, but at any rate, he said, well, what about celebrities? I could get you a celebrity and I think we could really improve your attendance. So what happened was I took one show, Dallas, Texas, and my son, Chris, did not want to work with me. I don't know why. He said, I'll work with somebody else. Who else can run the show? So I put my oldest son into Dallas, Texas as a manager. He and Chris went down there. They booked Peter Lucas from Mission Impossible, if you remember him, the strong guy, really good-looking guy, and they doubled attendance. Wow, we couldn't believe it. So we had to change the whole format of our shows because using TV celebrities, we had to advertise on TV. And at that time, we were only using radio and newspaper. So we stopped advertising in newspapers. We put every penny we could get into TV advertising. And that really turned the corner for us. Chris came up with the celebrities, and the next celebrity he got was Adam West and Burt Ward. I think everybody knows who they were, Batman and Robin. And then he came to me a couple of days later and he said, these guys will appear in costume if you want them to. I couldn't believe anybody would do that, but they agreed that they would appear in costume. When we checked into that, we found out that they and Warner Brothers did not own the right to the costumes. So we found out who the guy was that owned the right to the costumes, and his name was Roger Hess. And for some reason, he was a Broadway show producer. I don't know what he was ever going to do with these guys in costume. But anyway, I flew to New York, met with Roger. We became lifelong friends. And I don't think he even charged us, and he just gave us the right to use them in costume. That was even more successful than we had ever imagined. And that began that whole trend of using TV celebrities, which really took off for us in the 70s. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think we were the first one in the public show business to use TV celebrities. That was followed Adam West and Burt Ward. In fact, Adam became a lifelong friend of mine. And that was followed by Marty Milner and Kent McCord from Adam 12. They went over just as well, and eventually we used just about everybody you can think of that was on a successful TV show. Lou Ferrigno, I mean, the list is endless. And I got to meet all these guys. Some of them became great friends, like John Stamos, and just so many of them that, and of course a lot of them have passed on today. Jim Brolin, who's married to Barbara Streisand, did a lot of shows for us. And eventually, we sort of started to run out of TV celebrities. But along came other things that we could advertise. Along came a Batmobile. Wow, that went over fantastic. That was a celebrity in itself. And of course, the Batmobile, I call them supercars. The Batmobile was followed by the General Lee and the Knight Rider. Those were the three big cars, and if we could, like with the General Lee, we could book the entire cast of that TV show. So that was really successful for us, and our attendances continued to double and more as the years went on, through the 70s and into the 80s. Eventually we used all these celebrities, and we got into everything else you could think of. Football stars, baseball. In Pittsburgh, we used almost the entire team of the Super Bowl team there. They went over just as good. Eventually, we used NASCAR drivers, and we tried to use all the celebrities that we could as years went on, because we were expanding shows and running a lot more shows every year than we ever thought we would. By 1982, we were running about 100 shows a year, so we could use all of these various celebrities. It was all very, very successful, and that's how we became so successful for many years, right into the 90s.
Well, and something I remember about the World of Wheels, you had all the celebrities, but you also had musical acts.
Oh yeah.
You always had performers.
Yeah.
You had so many things to do, and even with the Playmates, you still kept that you had it really wholesome, where you could take your family and not worry that there were Playmates on the stage, because they were just sweet girls that were there signing stuff, so that was all right. But you had these cool headliners that were there playing at the shows, in the concerts, and that was an interesting deal. That's like you were telling me that you introduced Billy Gibbons to Ed.
That's right.
And Billy Gibbons is ZZ Top, and he's a great fan of Ed's, and I've been trying to get him here to the reunion somehow, but you introduced him. So it's stuff like that, and you're able to have all those contacts and make them work your way. And I guess the feature cars kind of developed into the Batmobiles later and all, but how important were the feature cars? And you were the guy that kind of thought, hey, feature cars would work in this kind of deal. How important was that to have the feature cars, and Ed was the main first guy? How important was that?
Well, even in the 60s, we were building feature cars. Cushionberry built a car for me, Gene Winfield, A Brothers, I mean, you name it, they were all building cars. And of course, Ed's cars, he was the first one, basically, before even the Batmobile became famous. So that's where it started. And I wish some of that was still going on today. I know that some of those cars were pretty outrageous, and some people looked at them and laughed, but it took a lot of creative talent to build these cars. Unfortunately, some of them didn't even run, but...
Well, they were art, weren't they?
Yeah, they were art, and they were so creative. And of course, a lot of them, even in Detroit, the Detroit automotive industry came down to Autorama, many of the guys that were in the design studio. So there were ideas that were carried over into the new cars. So we were always looking for new ideas, always, whatever. And even today, it's the same thing. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to find them today. When we were leading the way, nobody was ever using TV celebrities and sports stars. And I even had Tom Brady do a couple of shows for us. I guess I can say this, but you couldn't book an NCAA star until after he graduated. So I worked out a deal with a friend of mine, and we didn't go to the star. We went to Tom Brady's parents, and we made a deal with his parents. We never talked to Tom Brady. We just made a deal with his parents that after graduation, he would do 2 hours for us in 2 shows and do signings, and that was it for $1,000, $1,000 a show. And of course, he had no money. He had graduated from the University of Michigan. but he went over extremely well. He was a star at the University of Michigan, and we carried that idea into more cities as we went along, and even today we're still looking for celebrities. So whatever you could come up with worked, and that's what we tried to do.
Well, Bob, out of all of your ventures, I'm just wondering, what do you think was your most successful deal out of all those crazy things you were able to accomplish? What do you think was your biggest deal?
Well, I still think that the cars were the hit of the show, and I'd like to think that the three big cars we had, and even the cars that led us to those three big cars, the cars that Ed built and the cars that George built, and the early cars, I think that those were important to the shows. And the reason they were important was because in 1948, of course, Hot Rod Magazine had come out, and that made Peterson a success, and he eventually did over 15 monthly magazines, and there was a lot of publicity there. We were able to get all kinds of publicity on these cars that were being built all over the country. And I still like to think that the cars were the stars of the show, even though the celebrities went over so well. But it was fun meeting everybody, and it was just a great time. And I like to think that I'm still friends with some of those guys. I'd like to meet Lou Ferrigno if he was around. I've been hoping he would do a Comic-Con in Detroit, but I don't think he's done one recently because I haven't seen him in a long time. But anyway, it was great fun, and it was challenging, but it was interesting and it was enjoyable.
We're going to kind of wrap it up, but I'm going to ask you one more question. So, as well as you knew Ed, what do you think Ed would think of all this that Trixie's done with this museum and all of this? What do you think Ed would say or think about the tribute to him?
Well, I think he'd probably be flabbergasted. I think that, all of us who started in this thing, I just started as a hot rodder. I didn't know anything. I went to high school. I graduated from high school. As I think I said yesterday, I was going to be a dentist. Somehow I got into hot rodding. My life turned around completely. And none of us ever thought that all of this would carry on. My first successful show, I think I told you I made $10,000 in a day and a half. And my folks said, that's great, put it in the bank, and next year, when the show's over, you go back to painting signs. Well, of course, that never happened. And in fact, it went the other way. I became a millionaire for many years. So, but nobody could envision what was going to happen with this thing. And I think it's absolutely fantastic what Eileen's accomplished here, and I think Ed would be so surprised, and all the guys that helped build the hot rod sport over the years. Today they're legendary people, and that's just fantastic, and I'm happy that the sport's growing the way it has, and I'm just proud to be a part of it. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here, and who knows, maybe I'll be back next year.
Well, thank you, Bob. We'd really be proud to have you back, and thank you so much, pal.